Hello everyone and welcome back. I am Duke Silver and this is my recap of our second retro review bracket. For those new here, once a month we are taking 8 random retro games pulled from your suggestions. Each game gets about a half hour on stream, then we vote on which game moves on and which is eliminated, until there's one game left standing. The final game will get a full playthrough and video recap/review on the channel. Check out my video for the winner of our previous bracket, DuckTales, the link will be in the description. Also, please leave a like to let YouTube know it should recommend my content to more people, and subscribe if you want to follow along on this retro gaming venture. Our bracket this time includes TMNT for the NES, Gex for the original PlayStation, Parappa the Rapper for the PlayStation, Darkstone for the PlayStation, Ape Escape also for the PlayStation, Axley for the SNES, Alundra also for the PlayStation, and finally the Bugs Bunny Crazy Castle for the NES. Alright, let's get into our first matchup. TMNT for the NES versus Gex for the PlayStation. TMNT is the original beat-em-up and widely considered one of the hardest games on the NES, which is saying something. Gex is a side-scrolling platformer in the era where everyone was clamoring to create the next big video game mascot. I'm a big fan of the overworld in Gex, and just overworlds like this in general. Maybe it reminds me of my childhood traversing the Super Mario World or Mario Bros. 3 overworlds, but going from TV to TV, getting isekai'd into different worlds seemed really cool. And it may have been had I been able to progress past the first world in our limited time. You have to collect remotes to turn on more TVs to progress, but I wasn't able to get more than the one obvious one, and so couldn't turn on more TVs to check out more levels, unfortunately. The platforming was certainly janky, but sticking to the walls was pretty fun. I think the lack of progression, which may be due to user error, contributed to this very one-sided vote, as TMNT takes the first vote 7-3. Matchup 2, the all-PlayStation round, Parappa the Rapper versus Darkstone. I'd never heard of Darkstone before it was suggested, but it was a pretty interesting PS1 era Diablo-like. Parappa the Rapper was a game I'd always seen at the local Blockbuster and was curious about but never got around to trying. I believe this is the game that really pioneered the rhythm genre. The art style was really cool, and the one song I got to play many times over was honestly kinda bangin'.
Kick, punch, it's all in the mind. If you wanna test me, I'm sure you'll find the things I'll teach ya. Sure to beat ya, nevertheless you'll get a lesson from teacher. Now kick!
This game was really hard though. I'm not sure if it was just my lack of rhythm or input delay, as this was played on an emulator, but let me tell you, as Parappa would say, I was rapping awful. I did start to pick it up towards the end of our time, but couldn't quite clear the first song, unfortunately. This vote was really tight and had the most voters of all our polls, but the dark horse, Darkstone, manages to take down what seemed like the chat favorite up to this point. Our third matchup is Ape Escape for the PlayStation versus Axley for the SNES. I always assumed Ape Escape was something much different than what it is. Turns out it's a 3D platformer, and a pretty interesting one at that. Axley is a classic shmup, that's short for shoot 'em up for those unaware. This is one of the more unique shmups I've played, being able to move farther than just the screen to the left and right, which is utilized in pretty interesting ways via environmental hazards. Instead of a traditional you get hit you die system, instead you lose one of your 3 weapon systems when taking fire, and can switch between the 3 at will. Although if you crash it is still an insta-death. I would have been very okay with this game moving on, it was great. In fact, it's been included on a couple lists of best games on the SNES. Axley was a lot of fun, but also it was really difficult. But at least we did make it past the first stage, unlike a couple other games on this list. I guess not everyone found it as fun as I did though, as Ape Escape takes this vote 4 votes to 2. Our final matchup of round 1 is Alundra for the PlayStation versus the Bugs Bunny Crazy Castle for the NES. Alundra, from what I can tell, is the game adaptation of an anime adaptation of Legend of Zelda. The genre is hard to define as I didn't get too far into it, but from what I can tell it's an adventure RPG. The Bugs Bunny Crazy Castle is essentially chutes and ladders. I suppose we could call it a side-scrolling platformer or puzzle platformer. The goal of the game is to collect each item in the level while being chased down by various Looney Tunes characters. For some reason Bugs Bunny can't jump, you know, the thing that bunnies are well known for. Well, one of the things anyways. The game was fun for a little bit, but the janky movement and repetitive levels wore out their welcome very fast. Also, I guess the game isn't even finished, as once you get to stage 80, yeah, there's at least 80 of these, the stages are completely broken, and I believe they're up to 100, I can't confirm that, but yeah, that's a little bit silly. We of course didn't play up to stage 80, we looked up a password just to see what the end levels looked like, and yeah, it was a mess. Unsurprisingly, Alundra takes this vote 5-1. With our first round complete, it's time to pit some winners against each other. First up in round 2 is TMNT versus Darkstone. There are a couple of similarities between these two. You could make an argument that Diablo-likes are just an advanced form of beat 'em up, although I suppose you can make that argument about almost anything, so let's forget that train of thought. As I mentioned earlier, TMNT is widely considered to be one of the hardest NES games, and I'm here to tell you it lives up to that reputation. The life system is pretty cool though. You start with 4 lives, 1 for each of the turtles, each with their own individual health pool, and you can switch between them at will. I think the overworld for this game is really cool. We get a top-down perspective and get to see the turtles scurry from sewer to building, back to the sewers, while trying to avoid tanks that happen to be roaming the streets. As I said, this game is very difficult, but also very nostalgic, but that wasn't enough to keep it alive here, as Darkstone manages another victory over the more well-known game, with a vote of just 2-1. Vying for the second spot in the finals, we have Alundra versus Ape Escape. So a guaranteed all PlayStation finals here. I think these games could not be farther apart aesthetically. Alundra has very detailed 2D, I want to say tile art, whereas Ape Escape is 3D with almost no detail at all. Also, look at that draw distance. Oh boy. Ape Escape doesn't look any worse than other 3D platformers of the time though. And again, I think it was surprisingly fun. Controlling your tool with your right thumbstick took some getting used to, but I think it was a cool implementation of the then newly added dual stick technology. In the time that we played, we got access to a few of what seemed like many interesting gadgets. The first one, and my personal favorite, is of course the monkey lightsaber, which is used to beat the monkey. Oh god, this is just a police brutality simulator, isn't it? Anyways, the votes ended up tied, and I don't vote in the polls, but I do act as a tiebreaker in such an event, and I decided that I wanted to play more Alundra. Alundra just left me wanting to see more of the game, more so than Ape Escape, even if I was surprised at how much I enjoyed it. Alright, it all comes down to this, Darkstone versus Alundra, 2 games I've never played or even seen before today. So no matter what the winner is, I'm excited to dive into a classic that I missed out on. Darkstone has a lot going on, so much so that at first glance it's a bit overwhelming, but I just pushed past the options to get into the meat of the game, and what I found was a very interesting action RPG, something that feels really sophisticated for the era. It clearly draws a ton of inspiration from the Diablo franchise, not just in the way combat is played, but also in the lootathon and inventory management systems. I believe Diablo 1 did release for the PlayStation, so I'd be interested in seeing a side-by-side comparison. One thing that Darkstone does to set itself apart is it's essentially an open world game, whereas Diablo is very linear. While you can go anywhere, you probably won't survive long though, as the enemies aren't scaled with your level. Definitely need more time to explore the systems, but I was left wanting more after our time with Darkstone. We got off to a rocky start with Alundra. We were stuck on a boat for what felt like the majority of our time, and ended up having to look up how to trigger the sequence to give us access to the rest of the game. Again, the art style is very detailed and looks great. The dialogue is a bit dated and ridiculous, but seems like it's meant to be mostly silly and not taken too seriously, which I enjoy. The combat definitely plays a lot like a 2D Zelda, just with updated graphics, and I assume RPG elements down the line. We didn't get too far in, but just as with Darkstone, my time with Alundra left me wanting to explore deeper into the game. After all was said and done though, the chat spoke and Alundra came out ahead by a single vote. And there we have it. Bracket number 2 is complete, and Alundra will be getting a full playthrough. Keep an eye out for a video on the channel once that's done. If you want to follow along live, I will be streaming the playthrough in full on my Twitch, and I post in Discord every time I go live. Links to both will be in the description. As always, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like, comment, and or subscribe if you haven't already, all of which help feed the algorithm and help a ton getting this video in front of as many people as possible. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.